The 1944 D. Lincoln Wheat Cent, a small copper coin carrying a surprisingly big historical story, was minted during one of the most dramatic periods in world history, and every detail on it, from the wheat stalks to Abraham Lincoln's quiet profile, reflects a nation living through World War II while trying to remain stable on the home front. Struck at the Denver Mint, the coin carries the D Mint mark just below the date, marking it as one of the hundreds of millions of wartime cents produced to keep the U.S. economy running despite metal shortages, rationing, and industrial upheaval. To truly appreciate this coin, you have to rewind to 1943. The U.S. Mint made pennies from zinc-coated steel that year because copper was needed desperately for ammunition and electrical equipment. But the steel cents rusted, jammed vending machines, and were wildly unpopular, so in 1944 the mint switched back to copper. But not fresh copper. Instead, these pennies were made mostly from recycled wartime shell casings, melted down and struck into coins that symbolized both thrift and patriotism. So when you hold a 1944 D penny, you're literally holding recycled fragments of artillery from World War II battlefields, now transformed into money for everyday American life. The obverse front features Abraham Lincoln, the 16th president, designed by famed sculptor Victor David Brenner, whose initials VB appear subtly near the rim on later issues, but not prominently here. Lincoln's portrait was chosen to honor his leadership during the Civil War, making the coin not just money, but a continual reminder of national unity. Above his head sits the word liberty, anchored as a constant American value, while the motto, "In God We Trust," curves across the top. This phrase had gained emotional power during wartime, showing the nation's dependence on faith through uncertainty. The date 1944 sits prominently, marking it as the first year after the return to copper composition. The reverse back carries the classic wheat ears design, two stylized wheat stalks on both sides of the words 1 cent and United States of America, meant to symbolize American agriculture, abundance, and stability. Above those inscriptions is E pluribus unum, meaning out of many one, a motto that felt especially meaningful during World War II as Americans of different backgrounds united for the war effort. Even though it looks simple, this design is one of the most emotionally symbolic in U.S. coinage history. In terms of technical details, the 1944 D wheat penny is made of 95% copper and 5% tin and zinc, weighs 3.11 grams, and measures 19.05 millimeters in diameter. The Denver Mint produced a massive 430,578,000 of them, part of the massive wartime push to stabilize the currency system. Most circulated heavily, buying bread, gum, newspapers, and even movie tickets in the 1940s and 1950s, so finding a well-preserved one today is special. This coin is generally common, but mistakes from this year can be extremely rare and valuable, especially the 1944 D steel cent, which occurs when leftover 1943 steel blanks were accidentally used in 1944. Those rare errors are worth tens of thousands of dollars. The regular copper 1944 D penny, however, is mostly a sentimental historical artifact rather than a high-value rarity. Still, collectors admire it for its connection to the war effort, the recycled shell casing story, and the fact that it marks the return of the classic copper color after the single-year experiment with steel. For many collectors, these coins represent the resilience of everyday Americans during wartime, millions of ordinary people who used these pennies daily, unaware that future generations would treat them like tiny museums in the palm of a hand. In the world of numismatics, the 1944 D penny holds a respected place as part of the beloved wheat cent series, 1909 to 1958, a series that spanned two world wars, the Great Depression, and the rise of the modern American economy. Collectors appreciate it not just for its physical design, but for the history it carries. Every scratch on an old penny like this feels like a tiny story. Maybe it passed through the hands of a soldier home from war, a factory worker building planes, or a child collecting coins and candy wrappers during rationing days. Even though billions were made, each coin has lived its own life. That's what makes a 1944 D wheat penny fascinating. It's not rare, but it's alive with history, emotion, and the drama of a world struggling through war while trying to stay hopeful about the future. Holding one is like holding a small, copper eyewitness to a turning point in global history, a humble little cent that survived war, circulation, and time to reach your hands next top two. The 1947 Canada 1-cent coin is one of those small, unassuming little bronze pieces that carries a surprisingly dramatic historical story, shaped by World War, constitutional change, minting complications, and a unique political twist involving India's independence. Struck at the Royal Canadian Mint during a year of massive transition, the 1947 penny reflects Canada standing at a crossroads between the old British Empire identity and its emerging independent post-war self. Even though many people casually associate older Canadian coins with Queen Elizabeth II, the 1947 cent actually features King George VI, father of Elizabeth II, because this coin was made 6 years before she ascended the throne. And honestly, that detail shapes the entire narrative of why this coin exists, why its design looks the way it does, and why collectors consider 1947 one of the most historically compelling penny years in the entire Canadian series. To understand the coin, you first have to understand 1947 itself. The world was still recovering from the aftermath of World War II. Soldiers returning home, economies restarting, global alliances shifting, and countries redefining their political identities. One of the biggest geopolitical changes of this era was India gaining independence from the British Empire in 1947, and this event directly affected Canadian coins. Before 1947, the inscription on Canadian coins included the Latin phrase George of 6D, G, Rexy Tind, Imp, meaning George VI, by the grace of God, King and Emperor of India. But after India became independent, this title was no longer correct. The Royal Canadian Mint knew they had to change the wording on all their coins to remove the IND title, but redesigning coin dies takes time, and Canada urgently needed coins for everyday commerce during the post-war economic boom. So here's where things get fascinating. In 1947, Canada continued minting pennies with the old inscription for part of the year, even though it was technically outdated, simply to keep money flowing. These coins, including the 1947 1 cent, became what numismatists call transitional issue coins, coins made during a historic shift, caught between two systems. The obverse of the 1947 Canadian cent features the portrait of King George VI, designed by British artist Thomas Humphrey Paget, who was known for capturing a calm, confident, steady expression, a look Canadians respected deeply after the King guided the British Commonwealth through World War II. The King faces left, with neatly styled hair and a clean profile that became deeply symbolic during wartime and post-war unity. The inscription around his portrait reads George of 6D, G, Rexy Tind, Imp. The final year this wording ever appeared on Canadian coinage, making the 1947 issue the historical last breath of Canada's old imperial title. That alone gives the coin historical weight. It marks the direct end of an era, the closing chapter of the British India Empire, and the beginning of a more independent Canada on the world stage. The reverse design is a beloved Canadian classic, the maple leaf twig, created by legendary coin designer G. Kruger Gray. The two maple leaves, sharp and crisp, sit on a single stem, symbolizing Canada's nature, strength, and national identity, something Canadians held close during wartime rationing and Reconstruction. The bottom of the design reads 1 cent and Canada, with the date 1947 appearing prominently. Many of these coins also feature a small maple leaf beside the date. This is one of the coolest features of the entire series. The tiny maple leaf was added late in the year to indicate that these coins were minted after India's independence, while Canada waited for new obverse dies that removed the incorrect IND title. So even though the King's title was outdated, the little maple leaf signaled. This coin was made in transition while we prepare the new design. That mark has made the 1947 maple leaf cent one of the most famous Canadian numismatic varieties ever. Composition-wise, the coin is made from 98% copper, 0.5% tin, and 1.5% zinc, weighs 3.24 grams, and measures 19.05 millimeters in diameter. A warm bronze piece with that classic copper glow that Canadians saw daily in their pockets for generations. These 1947 cents circulated heavily during the booming post-war economy, buying candy, newspapers, soda bottles, and bus fares for millions of Canadian families adjusting to peacetime. Many became worn smooth from years of everyday use, and today heavily circulated ones are common. But beautifully preserved examples, especially those with sharp details, full luster, or special varieties like the maple leaf beside the date or the rare that variations are widely treasured by collectors. What makes the 1947 Canadian penny so historically rich is not rarity but context. It is a snapshot of Canada reinventing itself in real time, a nation transitioning from a war-supporting economy to a modern industrial one, a country moving from imperial identity to independent global presence, a monarchy navigating new political boundaries. This coin sits at the exact intersection of World War II recovery, British decolonization, and Canadian national symbolism. Every little scratch or discoloration on a 1947 one-cent piece feels like it carries echoes of that moment. Maybe it sat in the pocket of a war veteran returning to work, or a young mother feeding her kids in a ration-scarred world, or a schoolchild born into a post-war generation full of new hope. It is a coin that belongs equally to the past and the future, the last of the Empire era, but already hinting at the Canada that was about to unfold next. Top 3. The 1981 Canada 1-cent coin is one of those small, everyday copper coins that millions of Canadians touched without thinking, yet when you zoom out, it becomes a fascinating marker of a changing national economy, a shifting global metal market, and Canada's own quiet evolution under the long reign of Queen Elizabeth II. Minted at a time when the world was wrestling with inflation, metal shortages, and new industrial trends, the 1981 cent captures the last chapter of an era. The final years before Canada began altering its cent composition and eventually abandoned the penny altogether. Even though it looks small and simple, this coin represents the story of a country stepping into the 1980s with new economic pressures, modern minting technology, and a monarch whose portrait had already become an iconic part of Canadian daily life. The obverse, front, features the familiar portrait of Queen Elizabeth II, created by the Canadian artist Arnold Machin, whose elegant design appeared on Canadian coins from 1965 to 1989. In this portrait, the Queen is shown as youthful yet dignified, wearing her royal tiara, with soft, graceful features that Canadians had seen on their pennies for over 15 years by 1981. The inscription surrounding her reads, Elizabeth II DG Regina, shorthand for Elizabeth II, by the grace of God, Queen. This was a period when the Queen's presence on coins symbolized continuity, stability, and unity, especially as Canada saw rapid cultural change, the growth of multiculturalism, new political conversations, and evolving national identity separate from Britain. The obverse design feels calm and timeless, a steady anchor during an era that was anything but calm economically. Flip the coin over, and you meet one of the most beloved symbols in Canadian numismatics. The two maple leaves on a twig, a design created by G. Kruger Gray and used on the cent for decades. The maple leaf is Canada's most recognizable national emblem, and in 1981 it represented national pride, natural beauty, and a sense of unity from coast to coast. Beneath the leaves, the denomination 1 cent stands clearly, along with the country name Canada and the date 1981, all arranged in a clean, balanced layout that had become a comfortable part of Canadian life. This design was so iconic that many Canadians felt nostalgic about it long after the penny was discontinued in 2012. From a technical point of view, the 1981 cent was made of 98% copper, 1.5% zinc, and 0.5% tin, giving it that warm reddish-brown shine people associate with real pennies. It weighed 2.8 grams and measured 19.05 millimeters in diameter. But what makes 1981 particularly interesting is that this was the final year of the classic copper-heavy penny before rising metal prices forced Canada to change direction. In the early 1980s, global copper prices surged, and minting pennies actually cost more than 1 cent. This meant the Royal Canadian Mint had to rethink the economics of keeping the penny alive. 1981 sits right on this tipping point, the last comfortable year before big changes came. In 1982, composition would shift, machinability would improve, and by the mid-2000s pennies were mostly steel with copper plating. And by 2012, the penny was discontinued entirely. So the 1981 cent is one of the final chapters of the traditional, heavy, real copper era in Canadian history. Minting numbers also tell a story. The Royal Canadian Mint produced massive quantities of 1981 cents, hundreds of millions, because the economy needed coins to keep up with transactions in a high inflation period. With cash circulating heavily, coins wore down faster, meaning more had to be struck. Because of this, 1981 pennies were used constantly in everyday life. They rattled in pockets, sat in store cash drawers, helped children buy candies, and piled up in household jars. Many are deeply worn today, carrying decades of small scratches, dents, and color changes, each one a tiny map of its journey through Canadian hands for over 40 years. What makes the 1981 Canadian cent fascinating from a historical perspective is that it sits right between the old world and the new economy. Canada in 1981 was modernizing quickly. New technologies, new industries, new cultural movements, and growing national independence that had been developing for decades. But the penny stayed the same simple copper coin Canadians had used since the early 20th century. It is a coin that feels both traditional and transitional. It carries the portrait of a queen early in her reign, but minted during a moment when Canada was becoming more distinct from the UK than ever before. It bears the classic maple leaf twig that had symbolized the nation for generations, even as Canada was beginning to reinvent its identity for the late 20th century. And for collectors, the 1981 penny is a snapshot of that moment, a warm copper artifact from the era before composition changes, before the modern plated cents, and long before the penny disappeared entirely. It marks the last major year when the Canadian 1 cent was still truly copper in spirit and weight. When you hold a 1981 cent, you're holding a piece of Canada from a period of cassette tapes, early computers, economic uncertainty, cultural evolution, Cold War tension, and a young queen still shaping her presence in the modern world. Tiny coin, big story. Exactly the kind of thing you love next top for. The 1984 Canadian 1 cent coin, commonly referred to as the penny, is a fascinating piece of Canada's numismatic history, encapsulating both the country's cultural identity and its evolving coinage traditions. Struck by the Royal Canadian Mint, this coin was part of the long-running series of pennies that Canada issued almost continuously from 1858 until their eventual phase-out in 2012. The 1984 issue belongs to the modern decimal series, which had been standardized after Canada adopted the decimal system in 1859 and featured denominations aligned with the Canadian dollar. On the obverse of the coin, the design prominently features the effigy of Queen Elizabeth II, the constitutional monarch of Canada and the Commonwealth realms at the time. This particular portrait is the fourth official effigy of the Queen used on Canadian coinage, crafted by Arnold Machin, a renowned British artist and sculptor. Machin's design, first introduced in 1965, presents a youthful and elegant queen facing right, adorned with the iconic tiara of the George IV state diadem, which she wears on numerous ceremonial occasions, including the state opening of Parliament. Surrounding the effigy are the inscriptions Elizabeth II and Dei Regina, an abbreviation of the Latin Dei Gratia Regina, meaning by the grace of God, Queen. The careful detailing of the Queen's facial features and the intricate patterns of her tiara reflect the precision and skill of the Royal Canadian Mint during this period. The reverse side of the 1984 penny is quintessentially Canadian, featuring the beloved maple leaf design created by G. Kruger Gray, which has adorned the penny since 1937. The design shows a single maple leaf sprig, a national symbol representing Canada's vast forests and natural heritage. The words Canada and the coin's denomination, 1 cent, frame the maple leaf, while the year 1984 is prominently displayed below. The maple leaf design is noted for its simplicity and elegance, conveying national pride through minimal yet highly symbolic imagery. The coin's rim is smooth, and the overall design exhibits a balanced and harmonious aesthetic, reflecting the values of clarity and dignity in Canadian coinage. In terms of composition, the 1984 Canadian penny is made primarily of bronze, which consists of 98% copper, 1.75% zinc, and 0.25% tin. This alloy gives the coin its characteristic reddish-brown color and makes it durable enough to circulate widely, while still being relatively lightweight. The coin measures 19.05 millimeters in diameter, with a thickness of 1.52 millimeters, and weighs approximately 3.24 grams. The combination of size, weight, and metallic composition ensured that the penny was easy to handle and distinguishable from other coins in regular circulation. From a numismatic perspective, the 1984 penny is considered a standard-issue coin with no significant varieties or errors that distinguish it from other years in the 1980s. However, its value is not purely monetary. It holds historical and collectible significance. Collectors often appreciate it as a representation of Canadian culture and the continuity of the monarchy on Canadian coinage. While circulated coins generally retain only nominal face value, uncirculated or mint-condition specimens from 1984 can attract interest among collectors, especially when presented with original mint luster and sharp detailing. Culturally, the coin is also a reflection of Canada in the mid-1980s, a period marked by both economic stability and growing national identity. The penny served not only as a medium of everyday transactions, but also as a subtle reminder of Canada's heritage, linking the modern nation to its historical roots under the British monarchy. Over the years, the penny has inspired affection and nostalgia among Canadians, and even today, despite its removal from circulation in 2012, it remains a cherished artifact in private collections and educational contexts. In conclusion, the 1984 Canadian 1-cent coin is more than a simple piece of currency. It embodies the artistry of the Royal Canadian Mint, the symbolic authority of Queen Elizabeth II, and the enduring national emblem of the maple leaf. Its careful design, metal composition, and historical context make it a meaningful collectible for numismatists and a tangible connection to Canada's monetary and cultural history. Holding a 1984 penny today is to hold a small, yet potent, piece of Canada's past, an artifact that quietly tells the story of the country's identity, economy, and traditions. Next top 5. The 1987 Canadian 1-cent coin, more commonly known as the penny, represents a significant artifact in Canada's numismatic history. Struck by the Royal Canadian Mint, this coin belongs to the modern series of pennies that Canada produced from the mid-20th century until their eventual phase-out in 2012. The 1987 penny reflects both the continuity of Canadian monetary design traditions and the nation's cultural identity during a period of economic and social development in the late 1980s. On the obverse, the coin features the effigy of Queen Elizabeth II, the reigning constitutional monarch of Canada and the Commonwealth realms at the time. This portrait is the fourth official effigy used on Canadian coinage, designed by the British artist and sculptor Arnold Machin, and first introduced in 1965. The portrait presents a youthful, elegant queen facing right, wearing the iconic George IV state diadem, which she frequently donned during ceremonial occasions, including the state opening of Parliament. Surrounding the effigy are the inscriptions Elizabeth II and Dei Regina, the Latin abbreviation Dei Gratia Regina, translating to By the Grace of God, Queen. The intricate detailing of the Queen's facial features, hair, and tiara demonstrates the Royal Canadian Mint's craftsmanship and the emphasis on precision in Canadian coinage during this era. The design emphasizes dignity, stability, and continuity, reflecting Canada's deep-rooted connection to the monarchy while conveying a sense of national pride. The reverse side of the 1987 penny showcases Canada's enduring symbol, the maple leaf, designed by G. Kruger Gray in 1937. The single maple leaf sprig depicted on the coin represents Canada's abundant forests and natural heritage, making the design immediately recognizable as uniquely Canadian. Framing the maple leaf are the inscriptions Canada and 1 cent, with the coin's year, 1987, displayed at the bottom. The reverse design is celebrated for its simplicity, elegance, and clear symbolism, conveying a sense of national identity and continuity across decades. The smooth rim and balanced composition ensure that the coin maintains both aesthetic appeal and functional practicality in circulation. In terms of metal composition, the 1987 Canadian penny was struck primarily in bronze, consisting of 98% copper, 1.75% zinc, and 0.25% tin. This alloy gives the coin its characteristic reddish-brown hue and ensures durability for everyday circulation. The coin measures 19.05 millimeters in diameter, has a thickness of 1.52 millimeters, and weighs approximately 3.24 grams, characteristics that make it easy to handle and distinguish from other denominations. The consistent composition and dimensions reflect the Royal Canadian Mint's commitment to producing coins that are both functional and enduring. From a numismatic perspective, the 1987 penny is considered a standard-issue coin with no widely recognized major varieties or errors, making it relatively common among collectors. Nevertheless, Coins preserved in mint or uncirculated condition are often sought after by enthusiasts for their pristine appearance, sharp detailing, and historical value. Collectors also appreciate this coin for its representation of Canadian culture and heritage, serving as a tangible link to a period in which the penny remained a central element of everyday transactions and a ubiquitous symbol of national identity. Culturally, the 1987 penny reflects Canada in the late 20th century, a time marked by economic stability, political developments, and a growing sense of national pride. The penny served not only as a unit of currency, but also as a subtle reminder of Canada's historical ties to the British monarchy and its continued participation in the Commonwealth. Even as the coin circulated widely, it quietly embodied the values of continuity, tradition, and cultural identity, making it more than just a piece of metal, but a symbol of Canadian heritage. The coin's historical significance also lies in its representation of the monarchy on Canadian coinage. Queen Elizabeth II's portrait has adorned Canadian coins since her accession in 1952, and her effigy on the 1987 penny continued to link Canada's modern monetary system to its constitutional and historical foundations. The maple leaf design on the reverse reinforces the connection to the land itself, reminding Canadians of the natural beauty, resources, and identity that the country represents. Over time, this symbolism has made the penny a cherished collectible, inspiring nostalgia and historical reflection even after its withdrawal from circulation in 2012. In conclusion, the 1987 Canadian 1-cent coin is more than just a unit of currency. It is a carefully crafted artifact that combines artistic skill, cultural symbolism, and historical continuity. Its bronze composition, elegant maple leaf design, and the regal effigy of Queen Elizabeth II make it a small but powerful representation of Canadian heritage. Holding a 1987 penny today is to hold a piece of Canada's late 20th century history, a reminder of a nation's identity, its natural beauty, and its enduring ties to tradition and monarchy. For collectors, historians, and casual observers alike, this coin remains a poignant emblem of Canada's cultural and numismatic legacy. Next top 6. The 1946 D. Lincoln Wheat penny is a small copper coin with a big post-war personality, minted right at the moment when the United States was transitioning out of World War II and stepping carefully into a new era of peace and reconstruction. Struck at the Denver Mint, it carries the familiar D mint mark tucked just beneath the date, a tiny letter, but one that instantly ties the coin to a specific place, a specific time, and a specific national mood. After the turmoil of the early 1940s, America in 1946 was catching its breath. Factories were switching from tanks to consumer goods, soldiers were returning home to their families, and the entire country was shifting from wartime discipline to civilian life again. And in that transitional moment, small everyday objects like pennies quietly reflect the mood of a nation rebuilding itself. The 1946 D. Wheat cent is one of those objects, a coin born from the aftermath of conflict, designed to circulate in a country trying to heal and return to normal. To really understand this coin, you have to go back a few years. In 1943, the United States Mint made pennies from steel coated with zinc because wartime ammunition needed vast quantities of copper. But the steel cents were unpopular. They rusted, they stuck to magnets, and they were mistaken for dimes. So in 1944 and 1945, the mint returned to copper using recycled wartime shell casings, melted down and transformed into coins. By 1946, the war was finally over, but the legacy of those years still shaped American coinage. While many 1946 coins were minted with typical copper alloy, some may still contain trace amounts of metals from leftover recycled wartime supplies. This makes a 1946 D penny a symbolic bridge coin. Not made entirely from wartime shell brass, but still influenced by the materials and industrial habits of a world fresh out of war. When you hold one, you're holding the literal transition between wartime rationing and peacetime abundance, a tiny copper witness to the end of one era and the beginning of another. The design is the iconic Lincoln Wheat cent, created by the sculptor Victor David Brenner and first introduced in 1909 to honor the 100th anniversary of Abraham Lincoln's birth. The obverse features Lincoln's right-facing portrait, calm, thoughtful, and dignified, qualities Americans clung to in uncertain times. Above his head sits, "In God We Trust," a motto that took on powerful meaning during and after World War II. To the left of Lincoln is the word liberty, which the country had just spent years fighting to protect on foreign soil, and to the right sits the date 1946, crisp and clean, announcing the first full year of peace. Just below the date sits the small but important D Mint mark, marking this coin as a product of the Denver Mint, which was running at full speed in the mid-1940s to support the Reconstruction era. Flip the coin over and you find the reverse design, affectionately known as the wheat back. Two stylized wheat ears flanking the large lettering, 1 cent, and United States of America. This design wasn't just decorative. It symbolized abundance, agriculture, and steady American prosperity. After the tight rationing and shortages of the war years, those wheat stalks represented hope, a return to full crops, full shelves, and a stronger economy. Above the wheat heads appears E pluribus unum, Latin for out of many one, a motto that perfectly captured the spirit of post-war America as millions of veterans reintegrated into civilian life. Industry shifted gears, and the nation tried to reweave itself into a single unified whole. From a technical standpoint, the 1946 D wheat penny is composed of 95% copper and 5% tin and zinc, weighs 3.11 grams, and measures 19.05 millimeters across. The Denver Mint produced a massive 315,690,000 of them. Not the rarest by any means, but their story and timing make them historically fascinating. Most of these coins circulated heavily for decades, buying candy, newspapers, soda bottles, and school lunches, wearing down slowly as they passed through millions of hands. Today, circulated examples are common and inexpensive, but finding one with full luster and sharp detail, especially with a clean D Mint mark, is something collectors appreciate. There are also a few errors linked to 1946, including repunched mint marks, RPMs, where the D was stamped more than once, making the mint mark look doubled. Small mistakes, but ones that collectors love to hunt for. And while it doesn't have the dramatic steel-scent rarity of 1944 or 1943, the 1946 D still holds emotional weight as one of the first coins of post-war everyday life. In the broader story of American numismatics, the 1946 D Lincoln wheat penny sits at a meaningful crossroads. It marks the return of stability after years of metal shortages and experimental alloys. It marks the reawakening of an economy shifting from war to peace. It feels like a coin that belongs equally to the past and the future, a recovery penny, in a sense. This little copper circle witnessed the birth of the baby boom, the rise of suburban America, the return of consumer culture, and the beginning of Cold War tensions. Every scratch and discoloration on a circulated 1946 D penny feels like a history book. Maybe it sat in the pocket of a returning soldier starting a new job, or a young woman entering the workforce, or a child born into a peacetime world. So even though it's common, it's not ordinary, not when you understand the world that created it. The 1946 D wheat penny is a humble, hard-working artifact of America's rebirth, a tiny copper survivor that carries the tone, memory, and heartbeat of 1946 inside its worn surfaces.